Hi everyone, my name is Hannah and today I want to share with you a little bit about Waldorf education, the philosophy, and maybe you'll find that it's the right fit for you and your homeschool. Now, I have been homeschooling using a Waldorf-inspired method since 2003, but my connection to Waldorf education goes even further back than that, all the way back to the early 1980s when I attended a Waldorf school in a little town outside Paris, France. Now, I only attended for a couple of years before our family moved back to California, at which point I went to public school and kind of forgot about Waldorf education until my oldest child was just 5 years old and the idea of homeschooling entered the picture. I was reintroduced to Waldorf education, fell in love with it all over again, and we have been homeschooling using a Waldorf-inspired curriculum and methodology ever since. So here are some ideas about Waldorf education that might interest you and it might inspire you to use either the entire philosophy in your homeschool, or you might just pick a couple of points that interest you. The curriculum is set up to support the development of the child. So rather than looking at the child as a miniature adult, it looks at the child as a unique individual in a unique developmental stage. So you can roughly look at these stages every 7 years. So in the first 7 years of life, the child is in an imitation phase. They are definitely in their kinesthetic phase of learning where they're touching everything, they're observing, they're copying you. And they really want to know the difference between right and wrong, and they still live in an imaginary world of fantasy where it's really hard to tell the difference between reality and fantasy. In the next 7 years of a child's development, they are in an emotional development where they want to see the beauty of the world, where they are not quite ready for the critical thinking that is left for their teenage years. And it's a time when they go through a lot of little miniature developments that the curriculum supports. So one of the biggest ones after about the age of 7, when formal education starts and the children start to lose their baby teeth. And by the way, 7 is just a rough number. It can be as early as 6 or as late as 8. It really depends for each child. And remember that it's a transition. It's not just a day or a time or an age. There's just really a transition when that child is moving from one phase to the next. But after the 7-year change where they have become aware, they are more present, they understand fantasy versus reality, and that's when formal education begins. Right after that, they go through the 9-year change. And this is sometimes a troublesome transition for some children. It's a time when they can recognize they have a past. In the curriculum, it's a time where past tense verbs are finally introduced. They're not introduced before then because the children don't really have a grasp on it. They can certainly say the past tense, they could write it, but they don't really have a deep understanding of it until the 9-year change. The 9-year change is a time of upheaval for a child, but once the 9-year change has passed, you have about 2 years of really beautiful time with your child between the ages of about 10 and 12, before puberty, before the child's limbs have begun to extend, where they feel like their bodies are growing faster than their brains can keep up. In that time between 10 and 12, before the limbs begin to grow and after the 9-year change, you have this time, this golden opportunity where the children really have reverence for beauty and order. So geometry is taught in a really beautiful way, not with theorems, which are left for later when the child is ready for more critical thinking, but geometry is introduced in a very beautiful way with a lot of drawings and representations that then support other lessons in that year, like botany, for instance. And so you can see a lot of geometry in botany, and you can see geometry in the history lessons with tile work, for instance. So when the child is wanting this beauty and wanting perfection and wanting stories about heroes, the curriculum comes in to support that student with lessons that mirror what the child is going through so that the child feels like they're being understood. Okay, and then you have puberty, which is another huge transition and huge change that is seen throughout all of the world, and it goes across all cultures, that this particular transition is really significant. At this time, the child moves away from the beauty of the world. It's still there, and moves away from the drawing on the heart and the emotions, and moves into more of a headspace where they want more critical thinking, where they want more analysis, and to have deeper discussions on the why of things. Whereas before, the discussions didn't go deep into why things were happening. It was more the stories and history, and learning the basics of math and reading and writing. Now that foundation has been established, now the student can dive into more subjects on a deeper, more critical thinking level. Now, these different transitions and the way that the curriculum supports that development is not unique to Waldorf education. You're going to find it repeated in many different educational models: Thomas Jefferson education, Montessori, Charlotte Mason, just to name a few. They're all going to go through these different, or they're going to be conscious of these different developmental stages, and each educational philosophy is going to support that development with a curriculum that's specific for that student's needs. Okay, so some of the things that you're going to find a lot in Waldorf education are art, music, drama, eurythmy, because when education of the child is being done, it is not just academic education, it is holistic education. So you're going to hear a concept repeated often in Waldorf education, and that's the head, heart, and hands approach, as well as the rhythm of learning and the in-breath and the out-breath. Okay, so when you're thinking about head, heart, and hands approach, you're really looking at this complete picture of the child, where you want your lessons to address the entire child, not just the head, but you want the head, the heart, and the hands. And in so doing, you're going to find a lot of additional lessons that support that for the basic curriculum. You're going to find movement, spatial dynamics, eurythmy. You're going to find art in the form of watercoloring, drawing with color pencils, charcoal drawing. You're going to find molding with wax or clay. You're going to find woodworking and metalworking, and drama and speech, and of course physical exercise. So all of those things are going to also support the development of the child. And I forgot one of my favorite, actually, handwork. So in each of those separate lessons, you're going to find particular projects that are going to mirror the main lesson of the day, as well as the development of the child. For instance, in grade 1, the students learn how to knit, and they learn how to knit in a way that encourages the cross of the midline right at the heart when they're knitting, and this is going to really help with their brain development. Later on, they're going to learn how to purl as well as knit, and then they're going to start making little projects, and after that they can move into crochet and cross stitch. Then they're going to move into working with multiple needles to knit a hat or a pair of socks, and it keeps going from there, but each project has a particular use and function with the entire curriculum. Okay, so when you look at the main lesson blocks, and this is the main way that the academic portion of the curriculum is delivered, you're going to find a very unique way to approach these lessons. The first thing is this 3-day learning cycle, or you may have heard it as a 2-day learning cycle. In this way, you have a very long main lesson, about 2 hours in a typical classroom. Of course, this could vary in the home home setting, but we're going to look at about 2 hours for the main lesson. Now, if you typically think about a main lesson or a lesson in general, you're probably thinking that the new content is what you start the lesson with. But in a Waldorf setting, the new content actually comes at the very end. What comes first is review of the previous day's lesson. After that comes some work on the lesson that didn't come the previous day, but actually came 2 days earlier. And at the very end, you begin with your new content for the day. There's a lot of reasons behind this. The first is that these main lessons are quite long, and if you deliver the new exciting content first, the children will tire possibly and not get through some of the other work that they need to do. So you start with some of the less interesting work first, and then you keep kind of the exciting part for the very end. Another reason is that at the very end of the lesson, you present the new content, but it needs time to digest. We're not going to talk about it. We're not going to write about it. We're not going to draw about it. You're actually going to let your student go home, or in this case, in the school day, or move on to another subject, and you're going to let that child sleep and rest on it. Now, the brain's going to do a lot of work while it's sleeping, and it's going to digest that information. The following day, you're going to reawaken that information and bring it back up to the foreground for your child. So there might be some forgetting, there might be some remembering, there might be some processes that go on that help the student understand it better. After that, you're going to go into the work of the lesson. So you have your review first, and then you have the work of the lesson. Now, in this case, it could be written work, it could be drawing work, it could even be a project, a hands-on project that you're doing with the lesson, but it's going to be work that was introduced a couple of days earlier. And then again, you're going to end with your new content. And that's one unique aspect of the Waldorf curriculum that you could do with any other methodology, but you're definitely going to find it perfected in the Waldorf philosophy. All right, so next let's talk about the main lesson block. So we talked about the main lesson, which typically comes first thing in the morning at around 8 or 9 a.m. And the afternoons are generally left for some other kind of work that's less head concentrated. Maybe it's handwork or foreign language or eurythmy, but the main lesson is typically done in the morning in a Waldorf setting. However, you being a homeschooler, you can do the main lesson at any time of day, whatever suits your children. Some children seem to have their heads awaken in the afternoon and need a slow start in the morning. So whatever suits you, you may do it. All right, so now let's talk about this idea of a main lesson block. Now, a main lesson block is a period of time that you're going to concentrate on one particular subject area. Now, this differs from a unit study approach in that generally in a unit study approach, you try to bring in all of the subject areas into that unit study. Like if you're doing a history unit on, say, the Middle Ages, you might want to bring in some math that would relate to that, or maybe you'd create some questions that might relate to something about that time period. You might want to bring in some written work that relates again to that time period, read books about that time period, maybe even do some science projects that are inspired by that time period. And while this is a really beautiful way to set up your unit study, it's different than the way a main lesson block is set up. If the main lesson block is on the Middle Ages, chances are a lot of writing and drawing are going to be done for that main lesson block, but we're not going to be trying to add in other subject areas for the intention of rounding it out with all these different subject areas. However, that naturally ends up happening in a lot of main lesson blocks anyway. Not always, but it does anyway. For the written work in a main lesson block, you're going to either have some written narration that the student produces on his or her own. You may have some dictation that the teacher may recite out loud and then the students write it into their main lesson book, or you may have the teacher write it up on the chalkboard or on the dry erase board, at which point the students will do the copy work into their main lesson book. Now, what is a main lesson book? A main lesson book is a blank notebook in the younger years, and it might be a blank notebook with some lined pages as the student gets older, but you're always going to find some blank pages because there's usually some kind of drawing associated to each lesson, or at least every few lessons. So a main lesson book is where the student is going to produce his or her own work. There aren't very many worksheets in a Waldorf setting, but you certainly could add them in for math, for instance. But generally, students are going to produce their own main lesson books, which are going to become beautiful keepsakes that the students can review and keep their information kind of alive. And one of the best things I've noticed about our main lesson books is that the students don't just reminisce about it, but they kind of pour over them with this love and this joy, not just their own, but all of their siblings as well. And sometimes this inspires new main lesson blocks because it brings back these beautiful feelings of when they did it in the first place, or they're inspired by their siblings' main lesson books and they want to produce the same kind of work as well. So a main lesson block will span anywhere from 3 weeks to maybe 8 weeks. Mine tend to last a little bit longer, but that's not ideal. You want to keep your main lesson blocks around 3 or 4 weeks. You don't want to tire your students out. You want to keep them excited about the content and eager to learn more. Now, if you have a main lesson block that tends to be a little bit longer, you're covering more content, then it's recommended that you split that main lesson block into 2 blocks and separate them with a different block in the middle. Now, while I love this idea and keep striving to do it, I find it really hard for me to do that because once we're entrenched in a main lesson block, it's really hard for me to close the books and move on to something else. However, if you do, you will be pleasantly surprised at how effective it is to leave a unit or a main lesson block at its highest point and then revisit it later when the students are excited to go back to it and they have an opportunity to let all that information rest and digest while they move on to another main lesson block, and then they can revisit that information afresh. Even if they've forgotten a little bit, it's actually really good for them to remember it the next time they are presented with that main lesson block. Okay, so how does this actually work? A 3-week main lesson block or an 8-week main lesson block? How do you actually go about producing one of those, and how do you make it effective for your student? The first thing is that if you are using a Waldorf-inspired curriculum, you're going to find that a lot of them are set up either to be short or to be split in 2. Now, I prefer to do our math main lesson blocks first thing in the school year, as well as any new learning in language arts, which might be a small main lesson block at the start of the year. However, I find that for some lessons, we do our language arts throughout the year as small daily lessons, or we're doing them consistently with the writing that we're producing for all of our main lesson books anyway. However, it is nice to have a dedicated time to learn new content in language arts so that you can practice that information, practice those skills throughout the year. And that's one of the reasons why I like to put math and language arts right at the start of the year in September. If you start in September while the children are really fresh, you can imagine September as the beginning of a school day when your children are fresh and ready for head work. I think of that as September and October when the students have come back from summer vacation. They're eager to get into their lessons, and I try to do some of the heavier, potentially more boring work up front, not just because they're ready for it from a head perspective, but also it gives us the opportunity to practice those skills throughout the year in smaller daily lessons. So you're not just going to be doing one main lesson block and then that's it. You'll be doing one main lesson block, but then you're going to have multiple smaller lessons in the form of daily math, handwork a couple of times a week, maybe some movement a couple of times a week in the form of spatial dynamics or eurythmy if you choose to practice those in your home. You may have music and foreign language as well, but you'll definitely have some small daily lessons in language arts and or in math. Okay, so I like to start our year with those 2 main lesson blocks. followed by our history main lesson blocks in the winter when our days are shorter. We're in the northern hemisphere where our days get shorter in the winter, in December, January, where it's a little bit colder, where we like to cozy up and have a cup of hot chocolate, turn on the fireplace, and read a lot of books. And so I save a lot of our reading and our history blocks for the winter time. It just suits our nature really well. Then when spring comes around, we like to pull out our science main lesson blocks when the children are ready to just get out and be outdoors and move their limbs. It feels like they've kind of rested for the winter and had some introspection as the days have gotten shorter. They've done more reading and now they're ready to get out, get some sunshine, move around, do some science projects. They don't want to be sitting as much and cozying up. They want to be out. I also imagine that springtime is sort of like the afternoon of your day, when in the afternoon of a typical day, you might spend it being outdoors, going on a nature walk, doing your handwork, doing something that engages your body. And if we go back to the winter time, I kind of think of that as the midpoint of our day. We tend to do a long lunch, more of an elaborate lunch. Imagine it sort of like dinner, only at lunchtime. And we need a long break for lunch. We need a lot of time for our food to digest, for some quiet time, for some inward thinking time. And that's when my children either do a lot of independent reading, or will read together, or they'll listen to some audiobooks. So I think of the midpoint of the day sort of like the winter. So if you can see, there's sort of an arc to the entire school year, as there is an arc to your whole day. Now this works really well for us, but you might find a different way to set up your school year as well as your school day. Then you can take the entire summer off if you choose. That is something that I hold dear to my heart, that when summer comes, we put the books away and we just have a nice long break. Now, in theory, this is what I like to do. In reality, sometimes it doesn't work out quite the way I expect. And sometimes we'll end up doing some of the units that kind of lingered and didn't get finished in the summertime. And I find that I like to finish the year with a science unit, but a lot of times that ends up lingering all the way until fall. And because our falls feel like summer here in Southern California, sometimes we end up starting the school year with a science unit rather than our math or our English unit. So that's how I set up our entire year based on our main lesson blocks. You can do this with a unit study approach if you'd like, or at least you can take some of the principles of the head work kind of coming in the morning and some of the movement and the handwork coming in the afternoon. And that's just to look at these larger blocks of time in a school day, but within each lesson, it's great if you add in each part of the head, heart, and hands approach. So for a lesson that is head-oriented, like math, you might bring in some of the heart and the hands in the form of doing some art within your main lesson book related to the math. Or in geometry, that's a perfect example of bringing in quite a lot of heart into your math. In breath and out breath. This has to do with which projects and which lessons require work and dedication, and which ones are a release and a relaxation. When it comes to some subject areas, for some students, it's definitely an in-breath where they're using a lot of their concentration, they're using a lot of their life forces, a lot of their mental and emotional capacities in order to do the lesson, and then they need time to unwind, to relax, and a nice out breath. Now for me, sometimes watercoloring is quite an out breath, and even a lot of handwork can be an out breath. But for some students, that's not the case, and they'll need time to recover from those lessons. Even if they are out breaths for you, they may not be for your children, and they will need time to recover from that before they are ready to move into another main lesson block. I hope this information was helpful for you regarding the Waldorf philosophy and how you can incorporate the entire philosophy into your homeschool, or at least a few principles. Thank you.